Welcome to the Wellness in Asheville podcast, where we shine a light on the people, practices, and places that make this city one of the most inspiring wellness communities in the country. I'm your host, Travis Richardson, founder of Be Well Asheville, your local news source for health, wellness, and community events. Welcome back to the Wellness in Asheville podcast. You know, there are practitioners who treat symptoms, and then there are practitioners who rewrite the story of why those symptoms showed up in the first place. And today's guest is firmly rooted in the second camp. Dr. Kate Dwyer is a doctor of clinical nutrition and registered dietitian specializing in women's health across the lifespan. She brings together the worlds of epigenetics, hormonal health, and lifestyle medicine in a way that is both scientifically rigorous and genuinely accessible. Whether we're talking about methylation, menopause, or what it actually means to age well, she connects the dots in ways most people have never explained. And in this episode, I really enjoyed sitting down with Dr. Kate. Having her with such a ridiculously knowledgeable skill set and depth of knowledge was just super valuable to me. And I think for you as a listener, you're going to be really impressed with Dr. Kate. The more I've gotten to know her, the more I've seen her both depth and breadth on a number of topics. So without further ado, let's jump right in and listen to Dr. Kate firsthand. Okay. All right. So we have Dr. Kate Dwyer on the show with us today. I'm really excited. Dr. Kate's actually a part of our Be Well Asheville Wellness Collective. And since I've gotten to know her, I just keep being more and more impressed with the kinds of things that she knows. So today we're going to talk about epigenetics. We're going to talk about liver health, hormone health, lifestyle medicine, everything in between. So Dr. Kate, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Travis. I'm doing great. It's such a pleasure to be on the show.
Yeah. So tell us, so in 1 minute, give us like the 1 minute version of who you are and what drives your work and why the passionate pursuit of health for you. Where's that come from?
So I am Dr. Kate Dwyer. I am a registered dietitian and doctor of clinical nutrition. I specialize in women's health, helping women understand their hormones and feeling like themselves again. Through my practice, Kate Dwyer Nutrition, I primarily work with women navigating perimenopause, PCOS, metabolism changes, any kind of hormone-related symptoms. I see men as well, but I use a blend of functional medicine and evidence-based nutrition. What really drives my work is seeing how many high-achieving women are doing, everything they think is right. They're eating relatively healthy, they're exercising, but they're still not kind of optimizing, feeling best in their bodies. And they are often told it's stress or just aging, or this is just perimenopause. But that's not the full story. Lots of other things come into play when we have changes in hormones. So I'm passionate about helping women understand what's happening physiologically and giving them practical, sustainable strategies to get their energy and mood back. And so at the core of this, I just believe that women deserve healthcare that listens, educates, and empowers. I'm really big on body literacy in my practice and teaching women about their bodies.
Yeah, you have a really a very holistic understanding of health, and as it relates, especially to women in this category. And my gosh, I meet women all the time. 90% of my listeners and people I interact with are women, and they're often middle-aged women. And even my partner is struggling with perimenopause and trying to keep things like weight from creeping back on. And even though she's doing all these things, it's like sometimes really hard. So what drew you specifically to this area? Is there a personal moment for you? Did you, what sort of drove you to kind of get to the point where you're helping this population?
So I was really drawn to this work through a mix of personal experience and what I just kept on seeing in the medical system as a practitioner. On a personal level, I remember being in doctor's offices and just feeling dismissed, or like nutrition was just treated as like a really afterthought or not being mentioned in conversations. I know it's really hard to do in like a 15-minute appointment, but we're not asking the question, why is this happening? Like what are some of the underlying pathologies or things that just aren't optimized biochemical pathways in the body. And I did have one experience though, that one I was having a lot of GI issues, like bloating, pain, and that practitioner was like, "Hey, you have a food sensitivity," and that really kind of changed the way I was like, "Oh, like there's this whole thing about like functional medicine, and you don't have to necessarily have like a anaphylactic reaction to something to have a food sensitivity." And so that got me on a journey into more of the functional medicine realm. And now that's, that kind of mindset is exactly what I bring into my practice. I ask a ton of questions in my intake questionnaire. So I get to know the whole person, and that allows me to look at everyone holistically and not just dismiss separate systems or dismiss symptoms. I want to connect all the dots, right? And understand, what your body is telling you, and then use nutrition as a foundational tool to actually address what's going on.
Yeah. And before we go on, I was just thinking as you were talking, you have such a depth of experience. You have a doctorate in you're what's the diet as a dietitian? I don't know the formal name for it, but I'd like you to sort of say why that training puts you in a sort of a different spot than maybe other clinicians or other practitioners. What that additional training allows you, and how it allows you to be different from sort of like other people somebody might come and see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, like this has a lot to do with that individual path that I took, and becoming a dietitian. Nutrition's actually my pivot career. And my first college experience, I majored in biochemistry. I've worked in academic and clinical lab situations. And so that gave me a really great experience and a really strong foundation in science and, reading scientific studies. But, within that, when I started out in that pathway, I quickly realized that I didn't want to pursue a PhD or have a career built on government funding or the pharmaceutical industry. So it took me a few years, but I went back and got my registered dietitian credentials. So I got a second bachelor's degree, did an internship. And during that training, I realized that I wanted to do functional medicine. So I found a master's degree in human nutrition and functional medicine. And that really emphasized diet as like a foundational tool in nutrition. As opposed to some other clinicians that I've run into in this industry that have really emphasized testing. I don't necessarily emphasize as much testing in my practice as some other functional medicine providers. I look at deficiencies first, like if we are deficient in zinc and vitamin A, we're not going to have a great functioning gut. So finding out and focusing on that nutrition piece first, and then, maybe doing some more in-depth testing. I also am not huge on long supplement protocols or putting people on like 20 different supplements. I prefer to, again, correct those nutrition deficiencies, look at the core. Are we able to slow down when we're eating? Are we able to focus on our food so that we are digesting things appropriately? A lot of people, when they eat, are in fight or fight, not rest and digest. And then they have all these gut symptoms because they're not in that rest and digest. They don't have appropriate vagal nerve tone. So that's part of that. And then, towards the end of my master's degree, my program launched.
I think that's a critical differentiating point. As I was, hearing you say that, I think a lot of times we don't want to change, or we don't or a doctor doesn't
Mhm.
have time to work with us to change or talk to us about our kind of behavioral patterns, the things
Mhm.
that we do on a daily basis that can impact our health. And so, but what you're saying is that you would like to try to understand like the factors that are going into somebody's uh, condition, whether that is, like you just said, pace of eating, like are you eating fight or flight or not? All right. And so I guess if you're doing that, you're fundamentally trying to change the root sometimes of the problem. And
Mhm.
I guess some of your patients might find that their symptoms resolve without additional either pharmaceuticals or even nutraceuticals because they're shifting their behavioral patterns. They're looking at things outside more holistically than just taking a pill for taking. I see this paradigm of testing pill, whether it's nutritionally or
Mhm.
pharmaceutically. It's like
Mhm.
testing, and then here's the intervention. And it's like, what if we backed up for a second, right? So is that kind of your philosophy there too, or
Yeah, yeah.
how's it?
Or like if you're not sleeping well, you're going to be in fight or fight, right? And that's pretty much a lot of perimenopause women is they're going to have metabolic changes just from not sleeping well. And then they're going to have GI issues again from not sleeping well. Um, so sleep, whenever I talk to clients, I focus foundations are sleep and stress resilience. If those two aren't in line, um, it's going to be hard. You can't out diet stress.
Right.
You can't out diet
Right.
or you can't out, you can't out supplement a really stressful situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Now, where did I interrupted you? Do we remember what we were,
Oh,
you were
yeah. I was
saying?
just saying that, at the end of my master's program, my program launched a doctorate of clinical nutrition. And so I hopped on board to that. It felt like the next step in deepening my critical thinking skills in a clinical way. And yeah, I finished that program up 3 years ago now. Yeah.
Mm.
So was, yeah, in the school for quite a while. Really enjoyed that process and learning.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, this episode is supported by the 9th annual Love Shine Play Yoga Festival happening right here in Asheville, North Carolina, July 23rd through the 26th. If you're looking for a summer experience that actually nourishes your body, mind, and spirit, this is it. I've always said that Asheville is one of the most magical places for this kind of thing because of the energy that we have here. We've got the Blue Ridge Mountains as our backdrop, that creative, open hearted community vibe that you only find in Asheville. And this festival captures all of that perfectly. You've got world class yoga teachers, inspiring workshops, live music, nature experiences, and just a really beautiful, heart centered community coming together for 4 days. If that sounds something like your soul is calling for this summer, go check it out at loveshineplay.com and grab your tickets. All right. Thanks so much to Love Shine Play for supporting the show. And now let's jump back into it. Yeah. Well, when we talked initially I was kind of vetting you as a candidate for the podcast. We started talking the same. I was like, well, you quickly became a first choice for this series, which is about longevity, based off of the kind of things that I was looking for. One of those was an understanding of epigenetics because in the longevity space, if somebody's new to that word, I'll let you describe what epigenetics is, why it gets used a lot, and how it sometimes is misunderstood. But to understand that is really the frontier, I think, of understanding how we can slow down our aging, increase our health span, and of course, we might
Hmm.
talk about later the or the compression of morbidity. We'll talk about that later, but
Hmm.
it all relates to epigenetics. So let's get into that. What is it, and why is it misunderstood, and how does it matter as we age?
Yeah, so epigenetics is relatively new. So if you remember, like the early 2000s, we were really focused on DNA and what DNA, the whole genome project. And so we have DNA and then we have the epigenetics. So epi means around. And so epigenetics essentially is tags on our DNA that affect expression of DNA. So it's not in our DNA directly, but these are modifiable ways that we can control DNA expression, and that can be good or bad, right? You want to think about it as, if you're in the grocery store, you want some things to be locked away. We don't really accessible to things like tobacco, right? So we want things like our DNA to be locked away when it comes to pro-inflammatory genes or genes that are cancer related, right? We want those not to be turned on. On the other hand, we want things to be easily accessible, like fruits and vegetables. If we're in the grocery store, we don't want those to be locked away behind a counter. We want to easily access genes that are anti-inflammatory, that suppress cancer. And that's what epigenetics does, is it tags our DNA to either make it more or less accessible.
Mm. And so as we age, why do kind of relate that to what happens as we age? Why do we need to know how to influence those genes to turn on or off as we age?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Travis. So, depending on how these methylation patterns are on our DNA, that can influence diabetes, cardiovascular disease, mental health. And they've shown over time that we have certain methylation patterns as we age. And there are certain things that we can do to make our DNA methylation patterns younger. And there's a really great book on that by Dr. Fitzgerald called Younger You. She's done studies where she's implemented diet changes, exercise, lifestyle, and for just 8 weeks. And they've rolled back that epigenetic clock by over 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah, she I came across her work too in my studies. Actually I was doing a longevity course. Of course, as a layman, I'm out there trying to do my amateur level research, but I knew enough to see that what she was doing, and she actually has her own course out there about how to eat, and it actually mimics and parallels. One of the things I thought was interesting about her is her approach mimics Dr. Terry Wall's and the Wall's protocol a bit. And the Wall's protocol includes eating things like liver and lots of dark greens. It's kind of a Paleolithic diet. And Dr. Terry Wall's is from Iowa. She University of Iowa, where I'm from. So she's like my she's Iowa's claim to fame in the nutrition world. We're all really proud of her. But back to Dr. Kara Fitzgerald, I want to say she's like really groundbreaking in this in this regard on methylation and longevity. Excuse me. She can you talk more about her work, the nuances and the details a little bit of what she's doing and why it matters? Because I think she's an important figure in longevity.
Yeah. So I also mentioned that study was done on men. I always like to mention those little nuances. And I believe that she's working on a study to include women and do it longer. And so that's more of her intense intervention, and she has more of a maintenance stage. It's a little bit more doable because she does exclude certain foods on that. It's very like an anti-inflammatory diet. That excludes legumes for some people, for most people, dairy and gluten. So it's not always sustainable. But the foundation of her program is diet. So she really, really emphasizes at least 7 cups of vegetables a day. And, to the average person, that might seem like a lot because most Americans do not eat even close to that. But she really emphasizes the leafy greens, especially for their folate content. She also emphasizes this color. Color really interacts with our gut microbiome, and that's where 2/3 of our immune system lives. So if we are inflamed, right, we are going to produce more unfavorable epigenetic methylation patterns on our DNA. Right. So a huge part of this is just the anti-inflammatory, cleaner way of eating. Julie emphasizes organic foods. She does in the initial part limit meat or protein to 0.66 grams per kilogram, which is as a dietitian, I'm like, that's on the low side, but for 8 weeks, we could probably do that. But long term, that's not sustainable. But yes, she does a lot of different, or her program really emphasizes diet as a foundation, but also meditation. So working on that stress piece. Stress is a huge driver of inflammation in our bodies. I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that, but if you have unresolved trauma, or your stress resilience from whatever patterns you're modeled growing up is not sufficient to handle your current stress levels, that's huge. Like, you're going to be inflamed, and there's nothing diet-wise that we can do. Well, there's very little diet-wise that we can do to overcome that. So, working on that stress modification, meditation is huge as well. And then light exercise, not too much. You can't do too much. People who ever exercise actually have poor methylation patterns.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We see too that there's a cutoff in terms of exercise. The latest research shows that too much vigorous activity. So it's like there's a sweet spot where you do want vigorous activity, and there's some research that shows, like Dr. Rhonda Fitzpatrick talks about, she said just the other day, I was watching her, and she says 1 minute of vigorous activity is equivalent in terms of age reduction, or biological age reduction, by like 120 minutes potentially of low intensity movement, like just walking. Like crazy numbers. But then if you get to too much, you start to run into what you just talked about, inflammation, where you may be damaging vessels, and then your body may be trying to repair those by putting, the inflammatory markers, say, well, this has now been damaged. Let's lay down some plaque or something like that to kind of like repair the spot on the vessel that's been damaged. So we think about like longer term, like marathon runners and things like that. I always wondered about that. I was like, why do these sometimes they just kind of drop dead sometimes, like during the run? I'm like, well, it kind of starts to make sense. Like, really overtaxing the body. And I don't know that the body, while it can do those things, is made for it. So, okay. So another couple things I also wrote down that you said, and this goes back to when we look at studies like Dr. Fitzgerald's, is that this was a study done in time on a population for a specific reason. And yes, it showed that a holistic lifestyle reduced the pace of aging. But like you were saying with the protein, if you went by that diet or that program strictly, you might say, well, and you can talk to this too for women who are, perimenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal. Don't protein requirements go up as we age potentially? Like, isn't like we want certain amounts of protein, and it's different, right? That's why you got to go. You can't just take one reference point,
right? Or follow a restricted diet for a long period of time. That's huge too. But yes, for women in my practice, I always aim for 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram protein, and as we age, estrogen, progesterone, actually, I just saw a study on this. It was actually progesterone and testosterone really stimulate muscle protein synthesis, MPS. Which I thought was really interesting because, in women, progesterone is one of the first hormones to decline. So, if we don't have these hormones on board, we're going to rely on other things to get that muscle protein synthesis. Part of that is protein. Part of that is exercise, like weightlifting, so that we can stimulate muscle growth and just maintain that muscle mass. Because that's a huge predictor too of metabolic changes in women too, is the decline of muscle mass.
Yeah, we have like sarcopenia and those kinds of things. Like, my mom is dealing with that, and we know that exercise plus protein, as far as I understand, are the two strongest interventions that you can do to shift that. Well, let's talk about methylation a little more. if you haven't defined it, and I'm sorry if you already have, but let's define methylation a little more and what it looks like when it's suboptimal. Like, how would a person know, hey, my methylation doesn't seem optimal today. I should go see Dr. Kate and see what's going on. Like, let's talk about that.
So in plain language, methylation is a chemical process. It adds a carbon and 3 hydrogens to different molecules, to cells, to your DNA. That's part of the epigenetics, is the methylation. And so it's putting control marks on DNA, protein, and other molecules so your body knows what to switch on, what to switch off, and how to keep things balanced. It's also a huge part of liver health as well. So methylation, regulates gene activity. We know that poor methylation, low folate intake during pregnancy is linked to neural tube defects, right? And that's part of that whole regulating of gene activity. It supports detoxification pathways. So this could be, toxicants that you ingest, or it can be estrogen. Estrogen is metabolized in the body through methylation. So if you're someone who has higher estrogen levels, like if you're in that flux and perimenopause, you need to be methylating properly, assist in neurotransmitter production, and that's also huge in women during that perimenopause phase, menopause phase is, with the fluctuating levels of hormones that affects neurotransmitter production. And that's going to be even more aggravated if we don't have the necessary nutrients on board to help with that. It also plays a role in immune system function, hormone function. It handles things like metabolism too, and part of normal cell communication as well.
So if somebody is coming to you and they have they've got low energy, they've got, maybe their mood is off, cognitively they're not there, all those things are related.
Mm-hmm.
And they might come in and they might say, I think my thyroid is the problem or something like that.
Right.
How do you differentiate and figure out what is going on? Like, what would you look for? What would you do? Is there testing that you can do? Like, how would you, because this seems, the methylation thing seems to be, I know there's tests for it. Are they genetic? Like, what do they look like?
Yeah. So, I think you hit some of the symptoms on there: the fatigue, the mood changes, poor stress resilience, trouble clearing certain compounds like even estrogen and histamine. I see folks with maybe it's a little bit higher histamine type symptoms, maybe rashes, maybe they're waking up in the middle of the night too. And we can do, differentiation. One is a blood test. If checking for thyroid, we always want to run a thyroid panel. If we're also thinking about fatigue and mood changes, iron panel, hands down, especially in perimenopause women. Even in men, I had a client yesterday who was male and he had a ferritin of 22. That's pretty low. The American Gastroenterological Association likes that to be above 45 for ferritin. And then we can also do genetic testing to see if we have any what are called single nucleotide polymorphisms. So these are single base pair changes in our DNA that affect how methylation-related enzymes function. So they can function either more optimally or, more efficiently or less efficiently. And so one of the more popular ones that we hear about is MTHFR. But that's not the only one. We have MTHFR, MTHFD1, PMT, BHMT. We can also look at hormone methylation markers like COMT, which is related to dopamine and estrogen metabolism as well. So there's a bunch of different things we can look at genetically through a genetic test.
Yeah, those are new to me. I haven't heard of all of those. The MTHFR, yes, but not the other ones. So yeah, I think that's where you got to come in and see. And I think that's that as I remember it, if you're not methylating properly, the idea is that you potentially could need, if you're going to supplement, for instance, and we can talk about, actually, that's maybe a good next segue, is that, okay, well, because as I recall, somebody who was deficient had to supplement with like some multitude exponentially number higher B12 or something like that than another person, because the amount that they needed was just incredibly high. But there was a number, but it was just a lot. So how does that work? B12 shots? Like, what is the method for
Yeah.
supplementing or figuring that out?
Yeah. So for me, in my practice, I start off with like a simple methylated multivitamin. So something that has methylfolate and methylcobalamin, which is B12. And then we also focus on diet, because a lot of people, think they might automatically go to folate or B12, but really it's a lot bigger than that. And there are a lot of other supportive nutrients, and they're like vitamin B6, riboflavin. Um, Riboflavin is what's called a cofactor, so it helps the function of an enzyme. It can actually overcome some of the deficiencies of that MTHFR, and that gets not enough press. We need niacin. We need amino acids like methionine, glycine. Glycine is found in collagen. Glycine is actually a methyl donor and a methyl receptor, so it can either be broken down into a methyl group, or it can accept 3 methyl groups and become trimethylglycine or betanine. We need vitamin C. We need choline. 80 to 95% of Americans are deficient in choline. It's predominantly found in liver, eggs, and soy, not tofu, but soybeans. And choline, when we are low in choline, it increases our folate demand.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah.
Didn't know
And
that either.
actually, yeah. So if we're deficient in choline, that can cause fatty liver in folks. So then we're getting into liver issues.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we cite. So, a quarter of all Americans have fatty liver disease, but it's not something routinely tested because it doesn't show up on lab work. It usually shows up on imaging. We're not doing imaging of abdominal cavities on the regular. But yes, choline is huge, huge, huge. I could go on and on about choline.
Doesn't also Dr. Fitzgerald? I remember. So some of the food sources, I think, if I recall, one is beets. Beets supply. Is it TMG or?
Yeah, TMG. So that's the betanine, the trimethylglycine.
Yeah. So like for me, I happen to actually like beets. So to me, it's no big deal. Like a lot of people don't maybe like beets, but I guess I feel like there's a lot of, if you could structure proper eating, you might be able to get a lot of these things through diet, which I think is,
right.
If you look at, and this is the other thing I would have to stress too, maybe you agree with this, is that, when we're talking about these individual components, you just referenced a cofactor. And the way I see things is there are in any given food, like, countless, maybe hundreds, I don't know, thousands of constituent compounds in here, all working together, all have evolved over countless eons of time to come up with this thing, right? And then you eat it, and we don't know like what's going on with like what actual thing creates this synergy that makes the thing healthy. You take one thing away. A classic example, I guess, is it if you take too much zinc, you deplete yourself of copper, I think. Is that correct? Yeah. So it's like you got to know better to get your zinc and copper from something that has it in as a whole food, right? So that you don't have to worry, because these things have figured out naturally over the course of time how to put enough of in there, all of the ratios that you need.
Our bodies can better regulate that intake when it's in a whole food form.
Yeah. So moving on a bit from methylation, let's talk about APOE. Some of the listeners may have heard of ApoB. I know I have when I do my advanced lipid testing and my advanced cholesterol testing. One of the things that doctors for me are concerned about is my ApoB. Let's talk about B, and then actually the E, and then the variants, and how epigenetics sort of plays into all of that.
That's a big question, Travis.
Yeah, I know there's a lot there, wasn't there?
So apolipoprotein B as part of that advanced lipid testing. So you have to specifically ask your doctor for that. And that is a measure of atherogenic. So things that cause atherosclerosis, kind of the bad kind of plaque that the cholesterol that we don't necessarily want in our body that can predispose us to developing, heart disease. And that is a good proxy measure for, how many of actual particles in our body that are atherogenic. Not to be confused with APOE, which is more associated with Alzheimer's risk. And so whenever we talk about risk, we're talking about predispositions. And so these are not destiny, right? I really want to emphasize that. That's not destiny. Everyone who has a certain APOE variant 4 is the one of particular concern does not get Alzheimer's. It's about what we do to kind of modify that expression that really counts. And so there are people who don't have that develop Alzheimer's, right? And so your genes matter, but they're not the whole story. And that's where epigenetics comes in, because they can explain why two people with the same risky gene have very different outcomes, depending on, how they live, their lifestyle, and what they're exposed to.
Yeah. I think, when I had my genetics tested, and I mentioned this in a prior podcast recording, is that it came back with like countless things that were like really bad.
Right.
It's like, I'm like, well, shoot, if
Right.
I believed this, I shouldn't be here.
Right.
So I guess what I learned is that
doing right. And some of those genes don't even come into play if we're eating healthy, right? They kind of, are overwhelmed. But if we're eating that standard American diet, then that's what can really bring up some of those genetic predispositions.
Totally true. Let's talk a little bit about hormones. I'm doing actually a hormone guide here soon, and I'm going to be looking for practitioners who specialize in hormone replacement therapy.
Awesome.
So maybe you'd be a good candidate for that. But let's talk about bioidentical hormones versus conventional hormone therapy. What's the differences there? I think people are confused, and I've heard a lot of negative things. There's a I don't know if it's just a common, I feel like it's a bit of a myth that hormone therapy is like blanket statement bad, but I feel like that lots of people I run into like, oh, I would never do that. I would never do that. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
I don't see why.
Yeah. So first off, I just want to clarify, I'm not a prescribing provider, but I am working on my menopause practitioner certification through the Menopause Society. And so I really like to educate myself about, what my clients may be on and, how can we bring nutrition in to help support that. So bioidentical hormones are hormones that our body makes. And, these are also prescriptions. So, that you can get at CVS. They don't necessarily have to come from a compounding pharmacy, though, for whatever reason that can be an option for some people. They can come in different forms. They can come in patches, pills, creams, and, not to be confused with more synthetic hormones. And synthetic hormones can have their place just depending on the person and their goals and what's working for them, because what works for someone else is not necessarily going to work for the next person. Hormone therapy for most women especially is very personalized. I've had clients going like, I can't even tolerate progesterone, and that's not uncommon. Or I can't tolerate estrogen. That's also not uncommon. But then I also have clients that are like, oh, it changed my life, right? And so, going back to synthetic hormones are things like birth control. So think about, are things that have been more created in the lab, like progestins. That's a really common form of artificial form of progesterone. that you find in birth control pills, IUDs, etc.
Sorry. Okay, so yeah. So if I'm somebody who's like looking at getting bioidentical hormones, I guess maybe do you have a recommended path or a person or like way to access those? Like, what would be a way to do you refer out for that kind of thing, or how's that work?
Yeah. So there are two or several clinics in town that can help folks. One is Live Well and W&C. They are a gynecology practice in North Asheville. And then the Fosnight Center. Elise Fosnight is a urology trained PA, and she has a staff that provides great care for hormone replacement therapy. And then Mayheck also has a menopause clinic too, where they have trained practitioners on prescribing hormones and getting you on that right journey.
Okay, thanks for that. That's good information. We can put that in the show notes just to support the listeners.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you eat liver?
I do.
I have to ask. Do you eat liver?
Yeah, I don't eat it as a singular, like, oh, I'm eating like, liver and onions. um, I eat liver in the form when it's ground up with other meats, like muscle meat. So if you were in Asheville, you can go to like Earth Fare Whole Foods and you can pick up two different brands. One is Hairnet Gap has a vital organ blend that includes liver. And then there's another brand called a national brand called Force of Nature. They're also regeneratively focused, and they have liver blends for different animals outside of cows, or including cows too. But they have a chicken blend that's very mild. Actually, I made it the other day, and my husband was like, "This is really good," and I was like, like he couldn't even tell that it was liver. So the chicken, if you're looking for some like a starter into liver, chicken liver, especially chicken liver blends where they have other muscle meats in there, can be really helpful.
Yeah, and the reason it's funny because I've tried to get on, tried to do liver, and I just cannot make it a part of my like normal lifestyle. I really
Mhm,
it's something I have to think through and like be
mhm,
diligent about actually trying to do. And but I keep thinking about Dr. Terry Walls too, and how
mhm,
for just the listener too, she went from wheelchair and she went from a wheelchair to being able to walk, and I can't, and nobody can say precisely what the formula is for that. She's developed a protocol, of course. She would say that that didn't hurt at all to do her protocol, but a main component of that is liver, and
mhm.
so I always thought, gosh, I should really just be eating liver. And what is it, once a week or something like that is
Yeah, you can
the
eat like
recommendation?
I believe the younger you is like 2 to 3 times a week, 3 ounces. Um,
Okay.
you can also buy desiccated liver capsules too for the people who just, absolutely can't stomach eating liver as well. But yes, Terry Walls has multiple sclerosis, I think, and she
Yeah,
was
MS.
able to kind of reverse that progression through diet and lifestyle.
Yeah, pretty amazing, super inspirational, and her being a doctor herself, like, usually doctors run into clients or patients that do some of these things, but they themselves are not often um,
Hmm.
the person that does it. So it's really cool when you see
Hmm.
that because then she can talk to it from a very different perspective. Well, there's lots of things in longevity science right now that are
Hmm.
just exploding. We've got, biologics, epigenetic clocks that
Yeah.
measure your biological age. We talked about epigenetics a lot on this episode, peptides, you name it. I guess what are you most excited about? I know you're this is a topic that's of interest to you. What are you most excited about and what most concerns you?
I'm most excited about, all this research, like the younger you is just pointing back to diet and just the importance of having a good diet. And um, I think this can get overlooked in a lot of biohacking protocols. Like I'll have clients coming to me and they're like, what do you think about NAD? I'm like, but you aren't hitting your fiber goal, or, you're still way, like, I don't know how much this is going to benefit you if we aren't, leveraging the basics. And so I'm most excited about, how supports, especially epigenetics, eating a good lifestyle. And, on kind of that same note, what concerns me the most is that a lot of these protocols are not accessible for the average person, right? You have to have the funds because they can be really expensive. There's also, they may or may not be as established by the science and backed. So you have to take that with, kind of into consideration too. But yes, I would love to see, some of these a little bit more accessible to people, maybe covered by insurance and so forth.
Yeah, I know. I think for me too, what I've always seen is that I owned a gym for 8 years at a few different locations back in Iowa, actually, and it was a body transformation program. So it was a 5-day week. We did nutrition, fitness, strength training. We taught them how to eat and gave them a basic way of eating. And I always thought that at least 50%, if not more, of what I should have been doing is doing habit training, sometimes some kind of way to do habits, right? Because I mean, even doing one thing different from your normal routine is hard. Adding one thing in, let's say drinking more water, that's hard. It's hard to just drink more water during the day. And so I see sometimes these influencers on YouTube, and they're like, all right, here's what you got to do. And it's like this super, and then it's like, oh my gosh, nobody is, even if you do that, I promise you, your likelihood of doing it 1 year after you start is really low. I've seen it. Like I've seen people try, and it always goes really badly. And I think, of course, maybe that's where we get health coaching and some of the more supportive kind of things, or being able to spend more time, with folks like yourself to walk them through what are their lifestyle patterns. So, what I guess for you yourself, where do you see your practice? And I guess in this bigger context of longevity, and we talked about epigenetic medicine, like where do you want to see 10 years? We have AI coming on board. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What does 10 years look like out from here? What are we going to have?
I think that's really interesting too, because, part of that depends on the medical system as a whole. And we know that the medical system moves slowly. It takes a while for things to be integrated, for doctors and other medical professionals to be educated, and also for, the big payers, the insurance companies, to reimburse for certain things, right? So I think integrative and hormonal, especially for women, hormone replacement therapy is going to become more mainstream. And I think that's going to be amazing for women. But probably not fully mainstream. We're still seeing lags in access, reimbursement, and that implementation. But I think, going forward, as these things become more accessible, they'll become more talking points, even more like, we go through fads in health and science too. Like, 10, 15 years ago was the gluten-free fad and paleo, and some of these health things. But I think, as we get more advanced diagnostics and that cost goes down, more biomarker tracking, more metabolomics. So, like if I was to my clients, like, I really wish we had a test where I could just take a drop of your blood, see what's missing or like what's going on, and go from there. So I think, we're being closer and closer to getting some of that science and making it validated. But at the same time, whatever that is, like the data that comes out of that, it's still going to keep on reinforcing those basics: sleep, nutrition, stress, keeping a healthy body weight. So I think the future is more about, precision medicine and individualization than it is maybe some of these more generalized recommendations.
Yeah, I think so. I think also a movement toward having more in-home testing, a bit of outsourcing the need to go into a doctor's office as much as possible, just to cut on costs, but also because we now have advanced wearables that are also going to come down in price. We have continuous glucose monitors, so being able to do telemedicine a bit, I think, is going to help. I think I think it's a good thing, although I still think the human connection and in-person part is important. But we are going to have massive amounts of data that we're going to be analyzing and sifting, and so we're going to learn a lot about what works and doesn't work.
And the AI will come in handy for that.
AI is AI is a whole other topic. AI is going to be like, your blood sugar is low. You need to you have 3 oranges in the refrigerator. Go have half of one.
And pair it with a protein.
Yeah. Don't have the orange. That was not advice to anybody. Go have a protein shake, please. Cool. Well, I guess, how can people find you, connect with your work? What did they do to get into your world?
Yeah. So people connect through me, through my website. I have a blog on there. I think my latest post as we record this is about sleep, and what to do about sleep and perimenopause, because it's so foundational. I also have an Instagram that I keep active. If you want to work with me, one of the ways I'm trying to make care more accessible is accepting insurance. So I accept Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, MedCost, United Healthcare. And the great thing about that is that most insurance plans view nutrition counseling as a preventative benefit, meaning $0 copay. So for example, Blue Cross Blue Shield is amazing for North Carolina plans. They have about 30 visits per year with that $0 copay. So you can use the booking link on my website to schedule your appointment. So that's www.com. I also offer free 15-minute discovery calls. So if you're wondering if you're a good fit, that's another way to connect. And then for listeners of this podcast, I am offering 15% off cash pay packages until July 31st, 2026 with code BWA15. That's all capital letters, BWA15.
Okay, last question for you today. One piece of advice for a woman entering or who is in perimenopause currently and who feels like their body is becoming a stranger.
That's a good one. Part of that is just accepting that, okay, different stage of life, and giving yourself permission to treat this as a real transition and not a personal failure. Like, this is not something that you did to yourself. It's about, relearning your body and relearning what your body needs. So one of the most helpful things to ask is, what can you do to support yourself right now? Right? I mean, let's put up boundaries, saying no to things. Women are more susceptible to stress during this time. So, saying, no, I'm just not going to do that. And then grounding through basics. We want regular meals with enough protein and fiber, consistent sleep. I think I can't emphasize sleep enough for this population. Talking to your doctor, progesterone for a lot of women can be really helpful for sleep, because it affects that GABA receptor, and GABA is what calms us down. But if you have consistent insomnia, that's also something to get evaluated. Daily movement, right? Never underestimate just daily movement, getting out in the sunshine. Watch that overcommitment and say no to things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Say no to things. I love that. Well, thank you for being on the show today, Dr. Kate. It was really, I really appreciated it. And your perspective is amazing. I think we should do more talks like this and share more information like this, because I think you have lots more you could help people with. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Travis. It's my pleasure.
That was Dr. Kate Dwyer, and if this conversation lit something up in you, that's by design. The idea that how we age is largely written by inputs we can actually influence through food, hormones, methylation, and the choices we make in midlife, that's not wishful thinking. That's the science. And Dr. Dwyer is living proof of how to put it into practice. Remember to grab your 15% discount off cash pay packages with code BWA15 that expires July 31st, 2026. So make sure you call Dr. Kate and get in as soon as you can. Thank you for listening. You can catch the next episode while watching the sunset from the Grove Park Inn, wandering through Pack Square, taking a quiet morning walk through Biltmore Estate. You can check out more Asheville wellness news and events and join our newsletter at bewellasheville.com. And as always, thank you for being the best part of our wellness community. And until next time, be well.